What happens when the First Lady gets called out for spending taxpayer dollars on luxury events, and her teenage son responds by calling the cops on a congresswoman? Jasmine Crockett didn't back down. She doubled down. Look, if taxpayers are footing the bill for designer caviar and imported orchids while school lunch programs are getting slashed, we have a right to ask questions. That was the sentence delivered with Jasmine Crockett's signature calm but cutting tone during a live interview on Inside the Beltway. It wasn't just a policy jab, it was a direct shot at First Lady Melania Trump. The segment was supposed to focus on federal budget transparency, but by the time Jasmine leaned forward and uttered those words, everything else faded. The host tried to pivot. He wasn't ready for it. Congresswoman Crockett, are you implying that the First Lady is? I'm not implying, she cut in, not raising her voice, not flinching. I'm saying we've seen the records. If the White House wants to deny it, they can. But don't pretend this is new. No stammer, no grin, just facts. The studio fell into an awkward silence. The camera stayed tight on her face for a half-second too long before the director cut to commercial. Back in Dallas, her phone started vibrating, texts, missed calls. Her chief of staff, Ava was already waiting outside the studio when Jasmine walked out. That clip's going viral, Ava said, holding up her phone. Some folks are losing it. You're trending. Jasmine gave a half-smile. Good. Let them. Maybe now they'll pay attention. She didn't care about being viral. She cared about what wasn't getting fixed. Months of oversight, committee reviews, letters sent and ignored, FOIA requests stonewalled, Melania Trump's private events at Mar-a-Lago kept popping up in classified expense reports. Jasmine's team finally linked some costs to the office of the First Lady. Lavish receptions, imported decor, security details for non-official guests. It wasn't illegal, per se, but it smelled wrong, and Jasmine wasn't one to ignore the smell. By the time she got back to her D.C. apartment, the interview clip had hit 2 million views. Conservative pundits were calling it an unprovoked attack. A few liberal commentators cheered her boldness, but most were cautious. Melania had remained mostly apolitical in public, and going after the First Lady, especially this First Lady, was risky. Jasmine didn't flinch. That night, on the late feed of Cable Watch Tonight, a panel broke down the moment. They played the clip twice. I think she crossed the line, one former press secretary said. She didn't lie, though, another panelist replied. Intent matters, the first snapped. But what mattered more was the audience. On social media, people weren't debating intent, they were fact-checking. Screenshots of budget spreadsheets appeared. Threads explained how certain line items connected to Mar-a-Lago catering invoices. It was dry. It was complicated. But Jasmine had done something most people hadn't seen in months, she'd spoken plainly. No dancing around, and it hit. Even people who didn't follow politics started talking about it. Was it fair for Melania to host private events with taxpayer money? Should Barron Trump's 18th birthday party have cost what it did? At midnight, Jasmine posted a simple statement on her Instagram: public funds are for the public. If that offends you, ask yourself why. By morning, the real storm hadn't even started. But someone in the Trump household was already preparing to make it personal. Jasmine was halfway through her second cup of coffee when her phone rang, not her cell, her office landline. Ava picked it up. Congresswoman Crockett's office. There was a pause. Ava's brow furrowed slightly. Yes. Hold on. She covered the receiver. It's someone from the D.C. Metro Police. They're asking to speak with you directly. Jasmine didn't blink. Put them through. She'd taken calls from every kind of official, some more pleasant than others, but there was something in Ava's face that made her pause just slightly before picking up. This is Representative Crockett, she said. Good morning, ma'am. This is Sergeant Duca with the D.C. Metropolitan Police. We received a report last night regarding a harassment complaint filed against you. Jasmine blinked slowly. I'm sorry, what? Yes, ma'am. A harassment complaint. The complainant is a Mr. Barron Trump. He alleges that your televised remarks targeted his mother and posed a security concern. Jasmine stared at the far wall, silent. I need to make clear this isn't an official charge, Duca continued. But because of the complainant's status, we were required to log the incident and notify your office. A pause. You're telling me an 18-year-old filed a police report over a televised interview? Duca hesitated. That's correct, ma'am. She gave a short, dry laugh. All right, Sergeant, you have my statement now. Anything else? No, ma'am. We'll close the report unless additional complaints arise. I apologize for the inconvenience. She hung up without another word. Ava was watching. What the hell was that? Barron Trump, Jasmine said, rubbing her temple. Filed a complaint because I said his mom throws fancy parties. That can't be real. It is. And now, thanks to protocol, we've got a harassment report floating around the department servers. Ava sat down slowly. You think it was really him, or someone put him up to it? Jasmine didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew. It took less than an hour for the story to leak. A local political blog got the scoop first, breaking, Barron Trump accuses Jasmine Crockett of harassment. They cited law enforcement sources, which probably meant someone's cousin on the night shift forwarded a screenshot. By noon, Daily Journal ran with it, then Capital Lens. Then the conservative news cycle exploded. On TV, a red-faced pundit shouted, "What kind of grown woman goes after the First Lady and gets her son involved in a police call? This is what extremism looks like." They left out the part where no one in Jasmine's office had contacted the Trumps. They ignored the fact that it was Barron who called the police. Jasmine didn't flinch. She just watched silently as the story twisted. At 1:15 p.m., she stepped outside her Capitol Hill office, faced a small crowd of reporters, and said clearly, "I have not once reached out to the Trump family in any personal capacity. My comments were directed at a pattern of questionable spending that affects American taxpayers. That is part of my job." A journalist called out, "Congresswoman, are you accusing the Trump family of retaliating?" "I'm stating a fact." When a sitting member of Congress makes a public observation based on publicly funded activities, that's not harassment. That's oversight. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile. Another reporter shouted, "Will you be apologizing?" Jasmine looked straight ahead. No. Behind her, Ava was already drafting a short release. It would go live before the 2 p.m. news dump, before anyone could spin it further. What Jasmine didn't expect, though, was the wave of support that began rising quietly. First in group chats, then on Instagram stories, then in the comments of every viral news post. It wasn't just political allies. It was young people, women, veterans, teachers, people who didn't usually pay attention to committee hearings or budget line items. They weren't just watching anymore. And inside the White House residence, someone had to explain to the First Lady why her teenage son had filed a harassment report against a congresswoman. But by the time they figured out the damage, the internet had already picked its side. By 4 p.m., cable news had turned into a circus. Three-way split screens showed Jasmine's press statement, Mar-a-Lago aerial shot, and old footage of Barron Trump from years back, because no one had any recent material. That didn't stop them from speculating or editorializing or pretending this was anything close to normal. On Capitol Circuit, one anchor said flatly, "We have no precedent for a president's son involving law enforcement in response to congressional oversight." His co-host replied, "We also have no precedent for a congresswoman taking on the First Lady this directly." But viewers weren't eating the both sides narrative. People had seen enough. Jasmine's supporters started screen recording the original interview clip, reposting it with captions like, "This is harassment. Imagine calling the cops over this." A grainy video surfaced from a Mar-a-Lago staffer account showing a champagne reception with Melania walking past an ice sculpture of a bald eagle. The timestamp matched one of the flagged expense reports Jasmine had highlighted weeks earlier. It didn't prove everything, but it lined up enough to make people talk. On TikTok, users stitched Jasmine's quote with headlines about school budget cuts. Others showed stats on housing insecurity. Every clip ended with someone saying, "But they called the cops on her." Ava called from the office. "We've got media booking requests coming out of nowhere. Everyone from The View to a podcast in Milwaukee. Also, there's a candle shop in Ohio sending you a gift basket." Jasmine cracked the tiniest smile. "Tell them I appreciate the lavender." But underneath the calm, things were moving fast, too fast, and Jasmine knew better than to celebrate early. Late that evening, her phone buzzed again. It was Charles Drummond, a veteran civil rights attorney based in Baltimore. He didn't call often. "You're aware you're being targeted, right?" he said without preamble. "I figured," Jasmine replied. This wasn't about embarrassment. It was a pressure tactic. If you'd panicked, deleted your tweet, issued an apology, they would have claimed guilt. Jasmine sat back, silent. "But you didn't," Charles continued. "And now they overplayed. They turned a policy debate into a personal feud." Jasmine appreciated Charles because he never used 10 words when 4 would do. He got to the root of things. She needed that now. "Should I be worried?" she asked. "No," he said. "You should be louder." She exhaled slowly. That night, instead of retreating, Jasmine filmed a short video from her apartment. No makeup, no lighting crew, just her and her words. To every person watching, if asking questions about government spending is now a crime, then we've lost the thread of democracy. She let the silence after that line sit, just a few seconds. She posted it to her personal page and went to bed. By morning, it had more than 4 million views. And while mainstream media continued to fumble around the story, trying to balance politeness with politics, everyday people weren't mincing words. She called out the grift, they called the cops. The hashtag started quietly, buried in a reply thread under her video, #StandWithCrockett. By noon, it was everywhere, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, even on Facebook groups that usually only posted dog photos and school fundraisers. Celebrities picked it up. Former prosecutors, teachers' unions, grassroots organizers. A couple of black veterans started a side campaign on X, posting old service records and captioning them, "We fought for this country. She's fighting for its truth." The White House still hadn't issued a single official statement. And inside Jasmine's office, Ava's phone kept ringing. "Jazz," she said, poking her head in. "BuzzFeed wants a statement." TMZ too. "Oh, and a woman from Kansas sent you a handmade quilt with your name stitched next to Shirley Chisholm's." Jasmine chuckled. "Please don't let me become merch." Ava tilted her head. Too late. But not everyone was celebrating. Behind the headlines, a few powerful people were already regrouping, trying to figure out how a single televised sentence had set off a national reckoning. And they weren't about to let it go unchecked. By Friday morning, Jasmine Crockett had had enough of the noise. She wasn't going to let public opinion swing based on soundbites or cable spin. She wanted the public to see the truth for themselves, not through edited clips, not through headlines, but raw and documented. So, she told Ava, "We're releasing everything. Full transparency, no summaries, just evidence." Ava hesitated. "That's going to make some people real nervous." Jasmine didn't blink. "Good. They should be." That afternoon, her team uploaded a detailed PDF to the congressional website titled, "Expense Records Tied to the Office of the First Lady, Reviewed by the Oversight Subcommittee." It included redacted receipts, itemized service invoices, and memos from 2 previous fiscal quarters. They were dry but damning. One document showed a payment request for $137,000 labeled as decorative floral ambience for an event held at Mar-a-Lago. Another showed $9,400 charged for custom spa treatments for non-staff guests. Buried within it all was a single memo from a junior staffer warning that certain charges may raise public concern if reviewed closely. Jasmine underlined that sentence in red and reposted it on Twitter. They knew. But the real hammer came when her office released the full call log from her office phones and personal cell for the 48 hours leading up to and following the interview. No calls, no texts, no emails to or from the Trump family, their legal team, or the White House. Let's be clear, Jasmine said during a short video press release, there was no contact, no private message, no campaign to harass. I did my job openly in public. What came after was a coordinated attempt to smear and intimidate. Then she looked dead into the camera. And I won't play along. Charles Drummond watched the press release from his Baltimore office and immediately called Ava. That woman's spine is made of steel. She's tired, Ava said, glancing at Jasmine across the room. But she's not backing down. The media couldn't ignore the receipts. CNN brought in a government accountability expert who explained line by line how the office of the First Lady's funds were supposed to be used, then compared those guidelines with Jasmine's report. Look, we're not talking about napkin budgets, he said. These are significant expenditures with no clear justification. If anything, Congresswoman Crockett's oversight is exactly what's supposed to happen. At the same time, conservative outlets scrambled. Some shifted focus. Others began implying the documents were misinterpreted or taken out of context. One anchor asked, "Do Americans really care if Melania wants to throw a nice party?" The reply in the comments section said it all, "With our money? Yeah, we care." That night, Jasmine sat at home on the couch, legs folded under her, TV muted, phone open. She scrolled through messages, a teacher from Arizona, a nurse from Ohio, a retired Marine from Florida. Dozens of people thanking her, not because they cared about politics, but because they were tired of being ignored while the powerful acted untouchable. Her favorite message came from a teenage girl in Iowa who wrote, "I didn't know Congresswomen could do that. Thank you for not being scared." Jasmine smiled softly, but right as she was starting to exhale, her phone buzzed again. A text from Ava, "Call me ASAP. You're not going to like this." Jasmine called. "What now?" Ava sounded tense. "Someone just leaked a partial internal memo from the First Lady's office to a blog. They're trying to say you have a personal vendetta against Melania. And they're hinting at, well, they're implying race is the reason." There it was. Jasmine didn't yell. She didn't curse. She just said, "So, they're going low." Ava nodded on the other end of the line. "And you know what that means?" "Yes," Jasmine said, reaching for her laptop. "Time to go even higher." Because when they realized she wasn't going to apologize, they decided to try and tear her down. By Saturday morning, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a trending name, she was the center of a growing cultural flashpoint. What had started as a pointed budget critique had exploded into a national conversation about power, race, and who gets to speak without consequences. The leak from the First Lady's office only added gasoline. The phrasing in the memo, aggressively targeting traditional institutions, and lacking decorum, didn't need to spell it out. People knew what those coded words meant. And the internet wasn't having it. Jasmine supporters flooded every comment section, tweet, and article, not just in defense, but with fire. Videos popped up showing moments in history where black women had been punished for speaking too plainly, too boldly, too truthfully. A clip of Anita Hill played side by side with Jasmine's interview. A montage of Shirley Chisholm's speeches cut to images of Jasmine's press conferences. On TikTok, a former social worker from Tulsa uploaded a raw video with no filters, she said what we've all been thinking, and now they're calling the cops on her for what? Doing her job while black. That video alone got over 800,000 likes in 12 hours. Ava could barely keep up with the surge. Her team had doubled overnight, volunteers and interns jumping in to sort DMs, schedule interviews, and manage the waves of attention. One of the emails came from Pastor Roland Jeff in Sacramento. It was short: "Tell Congresswoman Crockett our church is praying for her strength, and tell her we've got her back all the way." The pressure kept building, but Jasmine never once played victim. She didn't need to. Instead, she posted a clip that was just 14 seconds long. "I was elected to ask questions, to speak when others whisper. That job doesn't stop because someone's uncomfortable." That video alone was shared over 20,000 times. And yet, in the middle of the chaos, the other side started slipping. Anonymous sources from inside the Trump team began talking quietly, then not so quietly. A well-known political columnist wrote a thread explaining that Barron's complaint may have been filed without full legal review. Another mentioned that staff were scrambling to contain optics around the First Lady's involvement. A screenshot leaked from a group chat involving campaign advisors. The message read, "We should have ignored her. This is getting out of hand." Back in Jasmine's apartment, the mood was cautious but focused. Ava handed Jasmine a tablet. "There's more. You're getting invited to speak at the University of Michigan next month in Georgetown, and 2 national women's organizations are asking if you'll keynote their fall conferences." Jasmine took the tablet, eyes scanning. "This wasn't the plan," she said, not bitter, not thrilled, just honest. "I know," Ava replied. "But you struck something real. People don't want the polished script anymore. They want honesty." Outside, protests had started forming. Not angry mobs, just people gathering with signs that read, "Truth isn't harassment, questioning power isn't a crime," and "We see you, Jasmine." In Philadelphia, a mural artist began sketching a massive painting of Jasmine's face beside a quote from her Instagram post. By the end of the weekend, it would be finished and covered by the local news. Meanwhile, TV anchors scrambled to reframe their talking points. The narrative was slipping out of their control. One veteran journalist put it bluntly during a panel, "Whatever side you're on, the fact that a first son called the police over a congressional inquiry is weird. This isn't just about politics. This is about behavior." But behind the curtain, the Trump PR team had switched gears. They stopped mentioning Jasmine by name. They stopped defending the complaint. And rumors started swirling that Barron had been instructed to stay completely out of the spotlight, no more public statements, no interviews, nothing. Because the damage was already done. But while they were retreating, Jasmine's story was only beginning to expand. Inside the East Wing of the White House, the atmosphere was tense. Melania Trump stood near the tall windows of her private office, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. A low murmur of voices behind the closed door was the only sign that several aides were still debating how to contain what had become a public relations wildfire. Her chief of staff, Annetta Kohler, approached carefully. "We've drafted a statement, but," she hesitated, "it's risky. Anything we release now might reignite the story." Melania didn't turn around. "I told him not to react." Annetta nodded quietly. "He's young. He thought he was protecting you." Melania turned sharply. "Protecting me from what?" A congresswoman asking questions. No one responded. Behind the scenes, the Trump inner circle had been scrambling. Donors had started calling. A few Senate allies privately expressed concern. One even suggested distancing themselves from the incident altogether. The problem wasn't Jasmine's words, it was the receipts. Those documents had landed like a slap. Every time a spokesperson tried to spin, another reporter brought up a line item: "How do you justify $23,000 for crystal table settings? What's the justification for a $17,000 gelato bar?" The budget office refused to comment. The ethics committee said they were reviewing materials. Meanwhile, every attempt at damage control only made Jasmine look stronger. Inside the residence, Barron had gone quiet. According to someone close to the family, he hadn't expected the reaction. He thought he was being loyal, but the media firestorm had turned him into a punchline, not in the way he'd hoped. On Reddit, someone had started a satirical account pretending to be his lawyer. On Instagram, users shared memes like, Barron Trump, the only teen who calls 911 over budget oversight. In private, Melania was livid. Not at Jasmine, not even at the press, at her own team. This was avoidable, she said through gritted teeth. They made her look honest, principled. She is honest, Annetta said under her breath, too quietly to be heard. Meanwhile, back in D.C., Jasmine stayed focused. She wasn't interested in whether Barron regretted his decision. She wasn't looking for retractions or apologies. Her mission was unchanged. But the tension behind closed doors at the White House was spilling into the public. A senior staffer from the First Lady's office abruptly resigned. No reason given. Another was reassigned to a lesser-known role in a regional advisory capacity. When the press asked, they were told, normal internal shifts. No one bought it. Charles Drummond called again. You've got them rattled. Jasmine leaned against her desk. I don't care about rattling. I care about consequences. Exactly, he said. And you've created a moment where people are finally paying attention. Don't let up. She didn't plan to. Later that day, an unnamed aide leaked an internal memo suggesting that Melania's office had warned Barron not to act impulsively after the interview aired. The memo read, "We advised against response. Exposure risk is high. Outcome unpredictable." The public saw it for what it was, damage control, thinly veiled regret, and maybe even a subtle attempt to shift the blame onto an 18-year-old. But Jasmine didn't comment. She was too busy reviewing new documents just released from a watchdog organization. One of them showed a request for reimbursement for a private event hosted by a European jewelry house. The event had occurred inside Mar-a-Lagos ballroom. The invoice was addressed to the office of the First Lady. Ava looked up from the file. This is worse than we thought. Jasmine didn't flinch. Then we keep going. At this point, it wasn't about one party, one event, or even one complaint. It was about a pattern of power protecting itself and using intimidation when questioned. The public knew it. Jasmine felt it. And behind the closed doors of the White House, they feared it. But what they feared most was that she wasn't backing down. And neither were the people standing behind her. By midweek, the story had taken a new shape. It was no longer about a single interview or a teenager's poorly thought-out police call. It had grown into something bigger, louder, deeper, a public reckoning. The House Oversight Committee announced it would hold a special review of all non-essential expenditures tied to the office of the First Lady. Quietly but officially, and that changed everything. Jasmine sat in her office, watching the hearing announcement scroll across the bottom of the TV screen. Ava stood beside her, arms crossed, jaw tight. You pushed them, Ava said. Now they have to respond. Jasmine nodded slowly. They can't keep pretending this is about hurt feelings. Meanwhile, major news outlets began revisiting old expense reports from the Trump administration. One by one, small publications started unearthing buried articles and long-forgotten budget discrepancies, things that had barely made a ripple before. But now, with the public's attention locked in, everything felt different. A journalist from the Sacramento Review uncovered a vendor that billed $44,000 for private scent coordination at a 2022 gala hosted by Melania. Another outlet reported that several private luxury car rentals, Lamborghinis, Bentleys, had been written off as VIP guest transport. Some of those events hadn't even included official White House staff. Lavish doesn't even cover it, a correspondent said on live TV. If these were corporate expenses, someone would have been fired. And yet, Jasmine still hadn't made it personal. She stayed on message, always pointed, always clear, but never petty. That restraint only strengthened her image. She wasn't seeking drama. She was demanding accountability. The public saw it. They responded. In Milwaukee, a group of retired postal workers organized a letter-writing campaign to Congress demanding full transparency on First Lady expenditures. They called it the People's Oversight. In Little Rock, a group of college students organized a teach-in about federal spending and ethics. A young speaker ended her presentation with Jasmine's words, "Public money is not private property." Melania, meanwhile, had vanished from public view. No photo ops, no statements, no tweets. The silence was loud. But not everyone stayed quiet. Congressman Hal Vernon, a senior Republican from Idaho, went live on Midday Nation and stumbled through an awkward defense. "I think we're blowing this out of proportion," he said. "So what if there were a few parties? Washington's always been about tradition and, ceremony." Jasmine's supporters latched onto the clip like a bone. A TikTok user replied, "Did he just say tradition is worth $137K in orchids?" Even conservative voters started expressing unease, not because of politics, but because the story was starting to sound too familiar. One caller on a Midwest talk radio station said, "I don't care who's in office. I'm a working mom. If I used company money to throw a spa day for my girlfriends, I'd be fired. So why is this different?" A week after the initial fallout, Jasmine was invited to testify at the upcoming committee review. She accepted without hesitation. In the days leading up to it, Ava's team scheduled closed-door briefings, practiced potential questions, and reviewed every single file again. They weren't leaving anything to chance. "This isn't just a hearing," Ava said one night as they sat in the office after hours. "This is the moment." Jasmine looked up from her notes. "Then we make it count." Across the country, anticipation built. People weren't just curious anymore, they were invested. They wanted to see how far this would go, whether accountability could actually win. On the morning of the hearing, protesters gathered outside the Capitol. Some held signs that said, "We paid for the party. Where's our invite?" Others read, "Crockett is courage." Inside, Jasmine stood before the committee in a navy blue blazer. No jewelry, no flashy colors, just paper, facts, and presence. She looked each member in the eye as she began. "My job is not to make people comfortable. It's to tell the truth, whether it offends the powerful or not." Silence. Then the questions began. But even before the first one finished, it was clear, the tide had turned, and no one could unring the bell. It took less than 48 hours after Jasmine's hearing for the machine to strike back. On a Tuesday morning, just as momentum around the committee review peaked, a tabloid site ran a front-page headline, "Congresswoman Crockett accused of aggressive behavior during law school years." The article was thin, citing unnamed former classmates and vaguely referencing a heated campus debate from over a decade ago. No official complaints, no record, just phrases like, "confrontational tone," and, "made others uncomfortable." Ava stormed into Jasmine's office, holding the printed article. "They're scraping the bottom now." Jasmine glanced at it. "They want people to flinch, make me look unpredictable. They're hoping I'll react emotionally so they can say, 'See, we told you so.'" Ava nodded. "Do we respond?" "No," Jasmine said flatly. "We focus forward. The public isn't stupid. They'll see the timing." But even as they brushed it off, more pieces started dropping. An old donor publicly withdrew support, calling her divisive. A conservative radio host aired a 10-minute rant painting Jasmine as a radical feminist with a vendetta. On the surface, it looked like a smear campaign. Behind the scenes, it was exactly that. Leaked emails later revealed that a PR firm with connections to a former administration official had been shopping the stories for days, offering them to any outlet willing to bite. Still, the hits kept coming. Someone unearthed footage of Jasmine at a protest years ago, chanting with a megaphone. The headline twisted it: Crockett encouraged anti-government sentiment. The video, however, showed her saying, "If the government refuses to serve the people have the right to speak up." It didn't stick. The more they tried to paint her as unstable, the more composed she appeared in public. Jasmine doubled down on policy. She gave a calm interview on NPR. She showed up at a housing forum in Memphis. She held a town hall in Gary, Indiana, no press, just residents, notebooks, and a folding table with lukewarm coffee. At the town hall, a retired bus driver stood and said, "I don't know much about DC games, but I know when someone's telling the truth. Keep your head up." Jasmine nodded, shook his hand, and kept going. But Ava noticed the fatigue. Not on her face, not in her voice, but in the way she lingered at the office longer than usual, in the quiet gaps between interviews, in the way she reread some of the same documents she'd already memorized. "People think you're iron," Ava said one night. "But it's okay if it's wearing on you." Jasmine didn't look up from her desk. "It's not me I'm worried about. It's the message." In a world of quick takes and scandal cycles, Jasmine knew this could all disappear in a week, buried under the next controversy, forgotten before it led to any real change. That's what the pushback was counting on: wear her down, discredit her, outlast the headlines. But they underestimated the ripple she'd already created. A group of whistleblowers came forward anonymously through a watchdog group, confirming that budget reports had, in the past, been edited before being archived, not illegal, but definitely misleading. Jasmine didn't gloat. She simply reposted the story with the caption, "Sunlight reveals everything." In a strategic shift, some Republican aides stopped talking entirely, hoping the silence would slow the momentum. But it didn't. During a panel on Civic Point, a former federal ethics advisor said plainly, Congresswoman Crockett didn't just ask a question. She forced the system to look in the mirror. That's what they're afraid of. By the end of the week, Jasmine's approval ratings had quietly risen, not among politicians, among people. And the pushback? It was still coming, still loud, but weaker now. Sloppy, predictable, because once the truth starts leaking through the cracks, no smear campaign can patch it shut. But Jasmine knew this wasn't the finish line. It was only the edge of something deeper. The invitation came in a plain white envelope, no logo, no seal, just her name typed clean across the front. Inside, a single card, St. Louis Public Forum Series Guest Speaker Invitation. Topic: Power, Integrity, and Public Accountability in American Politics. Location: Harris-Stowe State University. Ava held the card between her fingers. "You want to do this one?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I do." It wasn't a fundraiser. It wasn't national TV. It was a chance to speak directly to people who lived with the consequences of what others called oversight. The auditorium at Harris-Stowe was packed: students, retired teachers, parents with strollers in the back. A small table up front held a single bottle of water and a worn microphone with a loose cord. No flashy entrance, no music, just Jasmine walking to the podium and adjusting the mic. She waited until the room was quiet before speaking. "When I first ran for office," she said, "I didn't have big donors or fancy commercials. What I had was a promise to speak the truth, even when it's inconvenient." She looked out over the crowd, rows of wide eyes, open notebooks, quiet reverence. "And when I spoke about how our money is being used, how luxury and privilege are defended while basic needs go unmet, I wasn't trying to spark outrage. I was doing my job." A pause. "But the reaction I got, that wasn't about me. That was about a system so used to silence it panics when someone refuses to whisper." The room stayed still, not frozen, just deeply focused. I'm not here to drag names or make noise. I'm here to remind us that questioning power isn't disrespect. It's responsibility. She didn't read from notes. She didn't glance at a prompter. It was just her. The weight of the past few weeks sat in her voice but didn't shake it. She went on to talk about public trust, about how working families deserve to know where their money went, about the quiet pattern of retaliation when people got too close to the truth. Then she shifted. There's a reason they tried to discredit me instead of answering the question. Because they knew they couldn't defend what's been happening behind those closed doors. People started nodding. I wasn't angry when I spoke out. I was focused. But I got called aggressive. I wasn't lying. I brought receipts. But I got called divisive. I wasn't emotional. I was prepared. And yet, they still tried to paint me as unstable. Murmurs of agreement rippled across the audience. She ended with this: if this is what happens when a black woman asks a question, imagine what happens when she demands answers. The room erupted, not with fanfare, with affirmation. It was honest, raw, and earned. Afterward, students lined up, not for selfies, but for handshakes. Parents pulled her aside to thank her for showing their kids what integrity looked like. One elderly man clutched her hand with both of his and whispered, "You're not just speaking. You're waking people up." Back in the car, Ava sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone. That speech is everywhere. Someone filmed it and posted it with the title, "She said what we were all thinking." Already got 1 million views. Jasmine leaned her head back against the seat. She wasn't exhausted, just still. "It wasn't about clicks," she said. "I know," Ava replied. But it landed. That weekend, churches across the country played clips of the speech during service announcements. Community centers started discussions about transparency in local budgets. High school debate teams cited her quotes in statewide competitions. Jasmine had become more than a congresswoman. She'd become a mirror, and people were finally seeing the reflection they'd ignored for too long. Of course, not everyone liked what they saw. Talk of formal investigations started surfacing, not into Jasmine, but into the budgeting systems around the office of the First Lady. A few senior staffers quietly updated their resumes. Donors pulled back from visible associations. Lobbyists changed their tone. One political columnist wrote, "Crockett didn't destroy anyone's career. She didn't humiliate. She asked one simple question, and the entire structure flinched." But the real shift wasn't happening in headlines. It was happening in living rooms, break rooms, and kitchen tables across the country. It had been 3 weeks since Jasmine Crockett's name had first burst into the national conversation. And now she was sitting on a worn leather couch across from veteran journalist Elena Ford in a quiet PBS studio in Kansas City. No makeup team, no commercial breaks, just 2 women and a few cameras rolling quietly in the background. Elena leaned forward slightly. "Do you think things would have gone differently if you hadn't mentioned Melania Trump by name?" Jasmine took a breath, not heavy, not rehearsed. "Maybe. But then it wouldn't have been the truth." She didn't say it with arrogance. There was no smugness in her tone, just clarity. Elena nodded slowly. "Was there a moment where you regretted it?" Jasmine looked off for a second, as if replaying everything in her mind. "The only thing I regretted," she said, "was underestimating how far some people will go to protect the illusion of respectability." She leaned back, folding her hands in her lap. When you're a black woman in public office, you're always balancing between being clear and being called difficult, being honest and being labeled angry. So you pick your words carefully. You prepare for the backlash. But what you can't prepare for is the moment they try to make your integrity the problem instead of their actions. There was a quiet in the room that wasn't awkward. It was respect. Elena asked, "What got you through it?" Jasmine smiled just slightly. "The people. All of them, The ones who sent me messages from hospital beds, classrooms, small towns I've never even been to. People who said, "Don't stop." She looked straight into the lens now. Not the host, not for politics, not for drama, just for truth. This wasn't just about budgets or parties or one teenager's phone call. It was about whether honesty still means something, whether we're allowed to hold people accountable no matter who they married or where they live. She let that hang in the air. Outside the TV studio, things had shifted. The Ethics Review Committee had officially launched a full inquiry into discretionary spending in the office of the First Lady. Several subpoenas had gone out quietly. Melania hadn't been seen in public since. The phrase, Crockett Standard, was being used in Capitol Hill briefings to describe the level of documentation expected when using public funds. Jasmine didn't boast about that. She didn't tweet about it. She didn't need to. Her job wasn't to be a hero. It was to ask questions and hold the door open for truth to walk in. Weeks after the story peaked, Jasmine visited a public school in Dayton, Ohio. Nothing fancy, just a simple visit arranged by a history teacher who'd shown her hearing testimony in class. In a small gymnasium, a girl no older than 13 stood up during the Q&A and asked, "How did you not get scared when they tried to come after you?" Jasmine smiled. "Oh, I was scared. But I was also tired. Tired of watching people back down just because someone powerful gave them a look. And sometimes, when you're tired enough, you stop caring about what they might do and start caring about what might happen if you say nothing." The girl nodded, like she understood, even if she couldn't explain how. That night, Jasmine walked into her apartment, kicked off her shoes, and sat in silence for a while. The noise had died down, but something else lingered, not fear, not exhaustion. Purpose. She scrolled through her phone one last time before bed. A message sat unread from an unknown number. It simply read, "They thought you'd fold. Instead, you lit a path." She closed her phone and whispered aloud, almost to herself, "We're not done." Because the story wasn't about a first lady or a phone call or a viral hashtag. It was about truth and what it costs to speak it out loud. And now, more people were willing to pay that price. If you believe in standing your ground, holding power accountable, and protecting voices that refuse to stay quiet, subscribe, share, and keep this conversation going. Because silence only serves those who hope we won't notice.